Hi there, welcome to Storytime with Miss Andrea, reading on behalf of the Loveland Public Library. As always, before we read stories, we have to get our wiggles out. Can you stand up for me, please? I wiggle my fingers. I wiggle my toes. I wiggle my ears. And I wiggle my nose. I wiggle my shoulders. I wiggle my chin. I stretch my arms wide and I pull them back in. I wiggle my elbows. I wiggle my knees. I hop like a bunny. And I smile and say, cheese. Now I have no more wiggles left in me, and I'll sit on the floor as still as can be. All right, our book today is called Mr. Walker Steps Out. It's by Lisa Graf. It's illustrated by Christophe Jacques. Mr. Walker Steps Out. Mr. Walker worked very hard. Have you ever seen Mr. Walker? Yeah, in the crosswalk. Every day he stood in the window of his boxy little house on the corner of Broadway and Main and let the people know when it was safe to cross the street. Because when we see the little white man like that, we walk across the street, right? When it was not safe, he held up a big red hand so everyone would stop and wait. As he worked, Mr. Walker watched lots of wonderful things happening just beyond his window. He saw puddles being splashed and bikes being ridden, kids licking towers of ice cream, and dogs tugging owners on their leashes. Most days, watching was more than enough. But sometimes, Mr. Walker wished he could step out of his boxy little house and do something wonderful himself. So one day, he did. Mr. Walker propped up the big red hand in the window of his boxy little house and jumped down to the sidewalk below. Leaving was easy. He wondered why he'd never done it before. When it was safe to cross the street, Mr. Walker crossed. And right away, he started doing wonderful things. What's Mr. Walker doing? Yeah, jumping in puddles, or we're getting ice cream, or it looks like we're walking dogs, or being pulled by a dog. With each new thing he tried, Mr. Walker felt just a little bit bigger than he had been the day before. It was a very nice feeling. So Mr. Walker hopped on a bus downtown where he could do even more wonderful things. Things he had never dreamed of doing. What's he doing now? Yeah, riding the ride at the grocery store, or flying balloons, skateboarding. Some things were scary. Some things were downright magical. Mr. Walker's just looking at the big bright world out there with bridges and helicopters and buildings. With each day that passed, Mr. Walker found more wonderful things to do. What's Mr. Walker doing now? Yeah, roller coaster. Still, every once in a while, Mr. Walker would find himself thinking about his home on the corner of Broadway and Main. He wondered about the puddles and the bikes and the kids and the dogs and how they were all getting along without him. He wondered if they'd notice he was gone. And he wondered, now that he felt so much bigger, if he'd still fit inside his boxy little house in quite the same way. And then suddenly, something happened. Something very, very big. On the street in front of him, a truck's tires screeched. Horns honked, honk, honk, cars swerved, dogs barked, people shouted. And in the middle of it all, someone stood frozen. Someone very, very small. It was a little girl, Mr. Walker saw, who was trying to cross the street. Without thinking about whether he was doing something big or something small, Mr. Walker took the little girl's hand. When it was safe to go, he helped her cross the street. That afternoon, Mr. Walker made his way back to the corner of Broadway and Main. He found that he'd missed his corner quite a bit. As it turned out, his corner had missed him too. When Mr. Walker climbed back into his boxy house, it didn't feel nearly as small as it had before. It seemed to have grown while he was gone, just the same as he had. Mr. Walker fit perfectly. He took down the red hand he'd propped up in the window, and he signaled to the people that it was safe to cross the street. From that day on, whenever Mr. Walker watched the big, wonderful world from the window of his not-so-little house, he felt proud, because he knew that he was an important part of it all. But even the most important people need vacations. The end. So let's stand up and do a rhyme about crossing the street. So, red means stop, and green means go, and yellow means careful. You better go slow. I look both ways when I cross the street, and I use my head to guide my feet. Let's try that again. Red means stop. Green means go. Yellow means careful. You better go slow. I look both ways when I cross the street, and I use my head to guide my feet. Nice job. Get your clapping hands out and we'll say goodbye. Bread and butter, marmalade and jam. Let's say goodbye as high as we can. Goodbye! Bread and butter, marmalade and jam. Let's say goodbye as low as we can. Goodbye. Bread and butter, marmalade and jam. Let's say goodbye as fast as we can. Bye, 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 bye. Bread and butter, marmalade and jam. Let's say goodbye as slow as we can. Goodbye. Bread and butter, marmalade and jam. Let's say goodbye as quiet as we can. Goodbye. For those who might want it. Bread and butter, marmalade and jam. Let's say goodbye as loud as we can. Goodbye! Thank you so much for coming to Storytime today.